Hello, AP World History students. It is a beautiful day here in Minnesota, so I'm going to take this opportunity to record a screencast outside. Today we're looking at Chapter 3, India and the Indian Ocean Trade, the rise of trade and religious conflict. India is full of fantastic, beautiful, intricate architecture, so you will see a lot of pictures on this particular presentation that just shows really incredible monuments around India and Southeast Asia and along the Indian Ocean. So just for some background, where did we leave off with India? Well, mostly we talked about Hinduism and the caste system and the effects of that on Indian society as it developed. So remember, we have the Indo-Europeans coming down from the northwest. We have the Dravidians that are in India. They sort of mix and mingle, and out of the Upanishads comes the Rig Veda, and then comes the basics for Hinduism, which brings us to the caste system, and then popular Hinduism. We didn't talk really much about the early dynasties, the Mauryan or the Gupta dynasties, but let's just say that the Gupta ended something like the Han, where there was the Gupta fell apart, and India became sort of a collection of independent kingdoms or princely kingdoms. The princes were called Rajas. So the Gupta collapsed around 550 CE. India will stay pretty decentralized for about the next 1,000 years. We're going to look at some exceptions of that today. There is a lot of money flowing through India. So various parts of India have different commodities that they're trading and selling. And so they really don't need a centralized power because they're getting along just fine without it. The rise of the Mughal Empire in 1526 CE will be an important change. That word Mughal sounds like Mongol, and we know already that Islam and parts of China fell to the Mongols in the 1200s. Well, India will finally fall to them in the 1500s. So what we have happening in this era of decentralization are that northern India and southern India really are developing quite differently, and that's what we're going to look at today. All right, so let's talk about northern India right now. The first person we're going to take a look at is Harsha, and you can see Harsha's kingdom in green. So Harsha is in pink on this slide. In the 7th century, Harsha attempts to centralize rule. Now, Harsha had a pretty big military base. He had 50,000 infantry, that means foot soldiers, 20,000 cavalry, that means soldiers on horseback, and then 5,000 war elephants. Now, these war elephants didn't know if you were an enemy or a friend. They didn't really care. They actually gave them wine, or beer or alcohol before battle so that they would lose their inhibitions. It's kind of sad, but kind of funny. Hannibal did the same thing. I don't know if we talked about that in our class, but yeah, you get a war elephant a little bit drunk, and they're going to do your job for you. So Harsha does, develop this empire. This is actually thought to be a likeness of Harsha. It looks like he's sort of wearing like a hood or an umbrella with incense or something hanging in front of him. I'm not exactly sure. He was Buddhist, and what's kind of funny to me is that I don't necessarily think of someone who does all this warring as Buddhist, because I think a Buddhist is pretty gentle, but he sort of was contrary to that in the fact that he was a military leader as well as a Buddhist, and he was benevolent. So he was thought to be kind and caring about the lower classes. So what are some things that he did? He made hospitals. He provided for free medical care. He gave out aid for food or money to help buy food. He actually was a patron of the arts as well. And we have seen some of these other figures in history that are patrons of the arts and that help arts flourish. But alas, Harsha would collapse as well. So India will enter a period of feudalism. This is where you have the Rajas, the princes, and they have people who work in agriculture around them, and they're not centralized in any way. So land was granted in villages. The local landlords became powerful. That's how it worked. There were many local feuds, and we've talked about these before. One area wants what the other area has, or one area is suffering, and so the other one, they go after another one that's not suffering, that is having a time of plenty. Um, and Harsha spends a lot of his time trying to broker treaties and keep order, but he just can't do it. It's just not going to be adequate. Eventually, he was assassinated in 648 CE. He had no heir, and local rule dominated. All right, so the next attempt at some form of unification of part of India was the conquest of Sindh. So you can see Sindh on this map here. It's just in a tiny area of the northwest side of the South Asia. Over here, we have Persia. So you can see Sindh extends down the west coast of India, and a few places develop cities. Um, Another person that comes in is Mahmud of Ghazni. He is actually from Afghanistan, up in this area here, and he starts to attack into India. Now, Mahmud of Ghazni, let's see, expands all the way across northern India, what's now Iran, Afghanistan, and across northern India, part of what's now Pakistan. So this was called the Sultanate of Delhi. It's actually lasted over 300 years. So Mahmud's successors, they conquered Delhi and most of northern India. They have an army of 300,000. That is a huge army for that period of time. Some Hindus converted to Islam. Remember, actually maybe didn't mention Mahmud was Muslim. So going into northern India, some of the Hindus were like, "Oh, let's become Muslim because then we don't have to be part of this caste system." And then the Sultanate of Delhi did also charge that jizya tax on non-Muslims, like we talked about with some of the Islamic caliphates like the Abbasids. It was unstable sultan rule, and the Hindus were not easily controlled. There was a lot of conflict between the Muslims and the Hindus in northern India. And you know what? This lasts until the 20th century when Pakistan is finally taken out and partitioned from India by the United Nations. So this is not an unusual thing for the Hindus and the Muslims to be in conflict with each other in northern India. By 1500, 1/4 of the population in India is Muslim, and they are primarily in the Sultanate of Delhi. Now, being a sultan was a rather risky job, right? So, of the 35 sultans that ruled from 1206 to 1526, 19 of them were assassinated. And of course, it's about power, it's about succession. It really ultimately, I think, is about greed. But nevertheless, this was a time period of somewhat unified rule in the north part of South Asia. Here are some more examples of architecture in India. As you can see, there are geometric shapes as well as just really, really beautiful and intricate carvings all over the place. So history repeats itself. The sultanates are unable to control the mostly Hindu population in South Asia. They depended on local Hindu leaders for food and to carry out policy. This was kind of like the Persian satraps, right, where the Persians were the leaders of the satraps or the satrapies, and they were the satraps, but then they relied on locals. Well, this is sort of what they were doing in the Sultanate of Delhi, and didn't didn't really work out. Oh, and I'm just repeating something I already said. Okay, let's look at southern India. Southern India is going to be less intense, and there's going to be less conflict. So you can sort of see right here is Harsha's kingdom, here is the Sultanate of Delhi. Now we're going to look at the Chola kingdom and Vijayanagar. So let's get rid of northern India there. The Chola kingdom is down in this very southern tip of South Asia. It lasts from 850 to 1267 CE. So, what do we need to know about the Chola? Well, first of all, they have amazing temples. I mean, this one right here, if you zoom in, you can see just how incredibly intricate it is. These are really, really fantastical architectural sites, and they still are. These are modern day pictures. So the Chola divided their kingdom or their dynasty into mandalams. This is very much like the satrapies, right? These were autonomous administrations for each town. Each town and each mandalam were administered by assemblies, and this was restricted to Brahmins. So what religion are they? Hindu. Vijayanagar, two brothers, Harihara and Buka, 1336 to 1565. So if we go back and look at this, the Chola, they lasted till 1279, and then we have Vijayanagar after that. There's a little bit of a break in there. They were actually sultanates of Delhi, and they traveled south. And once they traveled south, they renounced Islam and converted back to Hinduism. This was a bloodless coup. There was nobody that was killed in this, and that's something important. They continued with the Chola style of government, the mandalams, and the economics, and maintained good relations with Muslim merchants and traders who were spread all around the coast of South Asia. There were few rivers in India. You can see these rivers here, most of them running just east-west. And one of the things that happened during this time period was extensive irrigation. Roads and cities were built, dams were built, and massive reservoirs are built behind the dam. So where a river is dammed, you have huge reservoirs that can provide water for many, many people. On this next part, we're going to talk about the monsoon winds.